I am always excited when we are joined by my next guest, the fascinating Jack Cashill. Jack, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me. And I'm glad to know that at least someone considers me fascinating.
Every time we've had you on, the conversation has gone to places that maybe weren't expected, but are always very informative. You've got a new book coming out called Unmasking Obama. And this is a trail that you've been on for many, many years in a variety of different ways, covering so many scandals related to Barry Soetoro. What's the new book about, Jack?
Well, I like to tell positive stories. Now, so the question is, what kind of positive story can you tell about Obama? And the positive element is wrapped up into the subtitle, and that is the fight to tell the true story of a failed presidency. What happened during the Obama years, and it's sort of the reverse of what's happening in the Trump years, of course, is that the major media refused to cover anything about Obama's presidency or even his candidacy that reflected badly on him or the Democratic Party. So, in other words, they were fully prepared to sit on Fast and Furious, the IRS scandal, Benghazi. If you like your health care, you can keep your health care. One scandal after another, Iran, and the list goes on. But in every case, someone from what I call the samizdat. Samizdat was the word the Russians used to describe their underground media. That is, the people who are cranking out things on mimeograph originally. I mean, Dr. Zhivago was published through the samizdat. The Gulag Archipelago was published that way. America's developed its own samizdat. And Jason, you're part of it. It's a samizdat of blogs, of talk radio, of online publications, of individual, sometimes sitting, the classics sitting in their basement in their pajamas, hammering out the truth while the major media tries to suppress it. So what I did is I went back and I identified every major story and highlighted the people who broke the story. And one story, for instance, is as an example, is the story of Fast and Furious. The major media never would have touched that had it not been for a whistleblower or two within the ATF office in Phoenix who talked to a couple of Second Amendment bloggers in Arizona. And bless her heart, Cheryl Atkinson, then of CBS, the one mainstream media person who was willing to report the truth, dove into the samizdat, found the Second Amendment guys, and broke the story out. And one of the Second Amendment guys has got a long name, I can't quite pronounce it, but he described the samizdat as a coalition of willing Lilliputians. So in Unmasking Obama, what I do is I give the Lilliputians their due. People you've never heard of, a lot of them, some of them you have. I mean, at the high end are people like Cheryl Atkinson and James O'Keefe and others. Andrew Breitbart, of course, was the MVP of the samizdat. But on the low end, they're just guys, ordinary bloggers who never broke another story in their life, suddenly are responsible for, bringing down Obamacare. It's incredible.
Well, but Jack, isn't this really what not just the corporate news is worried about? I mean, I've made this analogy many times because in part, this is stuff that's driven by technology, right? I mean, at a certain point when television was invented, the way of sort of swaying a group of people, it moved from churches and synagogues and these meeting places to broadcast. And we all know about Operation Mockingbird and the ways in which these broadcast entities can be controlled. Obviously, it's quite clear if you have a news broadcaster, whether it's Sean Hannity or Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow, you pay that person millions of dollars. And generally speaking, whoever it is that's giving you the millions of dollars, you're going to be pretty agreeable towards that person. And if they say, hey, stop talking about that or we're cutting off the millions, that's an aspect of control. The things that we're doing here on the internet and as an independent journalist and author, there's not that degree of control.
No, there's not. And I'm glad we have it. We know there are people who want to take it away from us, and we've seen that. But, you're right, though, Jason, for a period of about 35 years, the broadcast media had a total lock on information. 3 networks controlled what we saw, and that was all. The technology that I attribute with breaking the logjam is usually overlooked, but it really was the VCR, because for the first time, you could bring into your own home images that weren't produced out of New York City or Washington by one of 3 major networks, and it began to make the difference. For instance, I was watching. It was on Netflix the other night. I was shocked to see it on Netflix because it was so honest. And that is a 6-part documentary called Waco. Until I saw on my VCR the document Waco Rules of Engagement, I had no reason to believe but that the Waco was just another James Jones-like suicide cult where these people all killed themselves, Then I got into it, and you begin to study it. You begin to see where it was and what happened. And then I realized, here's the one punch they pulled about Waco. This is just a for instance of how the media control what we see and we know. On April 19th, 1993, 74 people died in that inferno at the Mount Carmel compound in Waco, Texas. Do you know how many of them were white?
I think 1.
No, 35 of the 74 were white. Most of the people who were killed that day were racial minorities. 27 of them were black. How many black people in America do you think knew that or even know that today?
I didn't know it until you told me last time. You're the one who revealed that to me.
Right. The greatest mass slaughter of black people since Jonestown, actually.
Wow.
Was in Waco. And that is the one punch the producers of this 6-part series pulled. Otherwise, it was remarkably fair and remarkably sympathetic, and it was on Netflix of all places. So if someone's looking for something to do for 6 nights, check out Waco on Netflix.
But it's interesting that that's the punch that they pulled, Jack. I mean, isn't that sort of a limited hangout, right? I mean, this is the way they do everything. They give you all this information that you're like, wow, that's explosive. And then they leave out this one part. That part that they leave out is usually the part that I want to know more about.
You're absolutely right. And because that would have been lethal. Had it been revealed in 1993, and they all knew this, that most of the people killed were minorities and that 27 of them were black, it could have cost the Democrats control of the presidency in 96. That was too much information to reveal, and it seems to be too much information to reveal even today.
Yeah, and I just want to explain for people, because we've got a lot of new viewers here on Crowdsource the Truth, Jack. Everybody's been locked in their houses for coming up on 2 months, and people are looking for answers. The term limited hangout, it was coined by Richard Nixon when he told, I think, John Haldeman that he was concerned about having all this information hanging out there, and they devised a plan to selectively reveal information, and Nixon approved of it when he realized they were talking about sort of a limited hangout.
Right. There's an interesting connection to that phrase, too, because the publisher responsible for, or the editor responsible for breaking Watergate was Ben Bradley, the editor of the Washington Post. He was the one who originated the phrase, let it all hang out. He didn't mean that either. He had his own idea of a limited hangout. It came in 1964 when his sister-in-law was murdered on a Washington, D.C. towpath. You know the story?
No.
Her name is Mary Pinchot Meyer.
Oh,
she was the
wife. I do know that story. She was involved with JFK.
She was having an affair with JFK. She was his go-to mistress in Washington, D.C. Her sister was married to Ben Bradley. Upon learning of her murder on the D.C. towpath in Georgetown, he went to her studio with Jesse Angleton, the big super spook from the CIA. They retrieved her diary, and what did they do with it? They burned it. This is and that was the expression associated with Ben Bradley. Let it all hang out.
Wow, I did not know that.
We just want to hang out stuff on that can indict Richard Nixon, not the stuff that'll indict JFK.
Yeah,
great
it's
story,
interesting.
by the way.
It is an interesting story, and for people who aren't familiar with this, Remind me, Jack, what was this woman's husband's name? He was also involved in the CIA.
Yeah, his name was Cord Cord Meyer,
Yes.
and the it was never solved.
Right.
They rounded up some poor black guy and tried him, but he was acquitted probably because he was innocent. And technically the case has never been solved.
But
And it's like the murder of Seth Rich. People
right,
didn't want to know. They didn't want to
right.
look.
I think it might be like the murder of Seth Rich in more ways than one. I
Yes.
tell you, I could talk to you endlessly, Jack, because this is such an interesting story. Now, I don't want people to think that we presume that Cord Meyer somehow orchestrated the assassination of JFK because JFK was having sex with his wife, but certainly it would potentially help motivate the guy to become involved in such a plan if one existed.
That's right. And it may have motivated his boss, Jesse Angleton, to go to the studio to get a hold of the diary and then burn it. But there also may have been just protecting JFK's legacy. Bradley had a stake in that. If it's his sister, his wife, his sister-in-law was having the affair, etc. Maybe he was indicted in the diary. Maybe she was. Who knows? We're just not allowed to know. There's certain questions we're not allowed to ask, and
Right.
let alone to find answers for.
Right. And, the Washington Post is one of the newspapers that David Rockefeller personally thanked for their discretion. I believe it was at a Bilderberg meeting when he was talking about the New World Order and how an intellectual elite of world bankers should be ruling the world, remarkably similar to what we see happening now with Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Al-Walid bin Talal, all these super rich guys that seem to run everything.
Yeah, yes, and Alawid bin Talal plays an interesting role in the Obama story too. So,
Let's hear that.
well, Alawid bin Talal is a Saudi prince who, on the occasion of after September 11th, he volunteered to give $10 million to New York City, to help rebuild. Rudy Giuliani, then the mayor, turned it down because bin Talal wanted Giuliani to acknowledge that Israel was somehow behind 9/11,
Huh.
which Giuliani would not do. But what happened is, this is one of the great untold stories. I tell this in my book, Unmasking Obama, which will be out in August. And it's amazing how well they suppressed this story. In March of 2008, when Obama was running for president, a fellow was on a local New York TV station called Percy Sutton, who had been Manhattan Borough president, a very well-known, respected elder statesman of the Black community in New York. He, an entrepreneur, politician, etc. He was on just a local New York show called New York One with a guy named Dominic Carter was the host. And Carter's asking him just casually, halfway through the conversation, "Oh, have you ever met Obama? What do you know about Barack Obama?" And then Sutton says, "Well, and he's in his 80s, but he's totally lucid. He said, years ago, about 20 years ago, he goes, the lawyer for one of the world's richest men, Alawid bin Talal, his name was Khalid al-Mansour, approached me and said, listen, we have a young man that we're interested in getting into Harvard. We know you have connections at Harvard. We were hoping that maybe you could write a letter to kind of grease the skids for this young man, Barack Obama, to get into Harvard." The year would have been 1988, by the way, exactly the year that Barack Obama started law school at Harvard. And Sutton said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I can do that." And he goes, "So I wrote a letter and I sent it off to Harvard." And the conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what we know. Here we have a totally respected Black entrepreneur and politician, a legend in New York City, casually telling a New York City radio TV host that a anti-Semitic Saudi prince and his anti-Semitic lawyer mouthpiece orchestrated or helped orchestrate Obama's entry into Harvard University. Now, you would think that would be worth a story,
Yeah,
right?
you would.
I wrote about it. A couple other people on the right wrote about it. I talk about Ken Timmerman because he did the best research on this. And but the what they do is the major media usually don't do the dirty work. They have a subcast of like and what I call them fire are the firemen. And in Fahrenheit 451, the firemen are the people who burn the information, who light the books and burn it so that that information doesn't get out. On the left now, they have a whole corps of firemen who burn the information or who will
Ooh.
attack the person giving the information out. In this case,
Ah.
they pulled out all the stops to suppress the release of this story, and they
Hmm.
succeeded. And that's what's shocking. The fireman, whom I name as MVP of all the firemen, because he's involved in every other story in terms of suppressing it, was the one who suppressed this story, and that was Ben Smith, the editor of, I think he's still the editor of BuzzFeed.
Oh, wow.
And then he was
BuzzFeed.
with Politico. BuzzFeed is huge, by the way. I mean, it sounds like some little rinky-dink thing, but it's worth about capitalized about $1.5 billion. I mean, it's a major operation.
I've always felt that BuzzFeed was sort of like the Filene's basement for, publications like the New York Times. When they want to put out a piece of crap, they can put it in BuzzFeed, and then the New York Times can say, hey, BuzzFeed is reporting this.
That's exactly right, and they did that most notoriously with
The
the P
dossier.
dossier. Yeah,
Yes,
right.
exactly. All right, so while we're on the topic of, fake news, it's interesting that, this picture just came up that I've never seen before. Perhaps you know about it. It alleges to be a very young Barack Obama with a very young, I guess this guy would be Al Walid. Are you familiar with this picture?
Um, I'm not sure I saw that before.
It says, does this photograph show Barack Obama with Prince Al Walid bin Talal? And it's on Snopes, so it probably says no, and that probably means it does. Some of the other people that Al Walid bin Talal hangs out with are alleged Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Pretty interesting,
Yes,
right?
yeah, yes. And by the way, Snopes, by the way, is part of the Fireman Brigade. Their job isn't to discern truth from fiction. Their job is to suppress stories that are unflattering to Barack Obama or whatever they're doing now. I just looked at them during their Obama years.
Right. It's interesting that you've introduced this term fireman because I haven't heard it in that context before. Jack, one of the things that's unique about Crowdsource the Truth, and this is not something that I invented, this is something I discovered. I have so many different guests on, you and Larry Klayman and Dr. Corsi and Charles Ortel, John Cullen, Mike Moore, all these different people. We had Diana West today, and everybody introduces a piece of information that perhaps the others don't know. And I'm
Right.
creating this kind of like virtual Venn diagram of everybody's knowledge, and the places where it all converges is sometimes so incredibly interesting. There is a social engineer who claims to be a fireman. And I now have a new understanding of what that guy's purpose very likely is. Let's get back to Jamal Khashoggi for a second, because for people who think that he is a journalist, this picture shows him in Afghanistan in the 1980s holding a rocket-propelled grenade, hanging out with the Mujahideen.
Yeah, yeah. He was like a pretty versatile journalist.
Right. Now, I don't know about you, Jack, but I certainly would not handle a 1980s Soviet era rocket-propelled grenade. It seems kind of dangerous. But I'm also interested in the relationship between Al Walid bin Talal and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. There's this really interesting photo here where the current owner of the Washington Post is having a good laugh with his buddy who, Jamal Khashoggi, he got chopped up into bits, and that's basically attributed to Mohammed bin Salman. I'm not saying he did or didn't. Seems like an awkward moment, doesn't it?
They seem like, I don't know, it doesn't look awkward to me. It looks like they're bosom buddies.
Well, shortly after this meeting, Jeff Bezos alleged that MBS hacked his phone. MBS apparently got his number, called him on WhatsApp or something like that, and then all those photos of Jeff Bezos Jr. with some other woman came out, and that resulted in his divorce and multi-millions.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Jeff Bezos probably richly deserved his fate in that case. So there's certain things you can do that in this day and age that are going to get you in trouble,
Yes, absolutely. Now back to Obama for a second. We had a question from Spanman, a regular viewer, prior to the start of the show. And you've done a lot of writing about the Barack Obama birth certificate. We've had Mike Zullo on the show, who was the lead investigator on Sheriff Arpaio's cold case Posse. In 2016 or maybe even 2015, those guys presented compelling evidence that the digital document the public has seen was a total forgery. People seem to jump to the conclusion that that means you or I or Mike Zullo are alleging that Barack Obama was born in Kenya. We're not saying that. We're just saying that the document was forged. There was a woman who actually went to Hawaii to retrieve the document, which is odd since the only thing we've ever seen and the only document that we're aware of is a digital PDF. Seems a lot easier to email that than to get on a plane. But she was the only fatality in a very survivable plane crash. What can you say about this?
That's an excellent question. We're talking about Ms. Fuddy here, correct?
Yes.
And, it's odd because I've investigated a lot of things that are controversial. Sometimes bizarre stuff just happens. You know what I mean? And you really have to pull back before you attribute it to some. Let me just tell you a little side story that just this kind of a humorous digression.
Sure.
Right after my Flight 800 book came out, and while I was working on my book on Ron Brown, both of them, pretty controversial, I was walking along the creek that runs through the middle of Kansas City where I live. And I always walk along the edge because I like to walk along edges of things. I got lost in thought and I fell in. Right? Whoa. And this is in November, and I'm wearing heavy sweats. So I said, I'll just climb out. Well, it's about an 18-inch gap between the ledge, the concrete, and the water. I couldn't get my leg out and over the concrete.
Wow.
And while I'm there, I'm thinking, what if I drowned here? Who would ever believe that it wasn't murder,
Right.
Well, and here's what was totally bizarre. No one is ever down in this creek bed in the middle of the winter. This big old guy comes walking along out of nowhere a minute later. And I said to him, "Hey, Mac." And he looks down, he gives that incredible double take. What are you doing in a creek? I said, "Could you give me a hand?" And, he gives me a hand and pulls me out,
Wow.
But sometimes I just use that as an example of sometimes you don't want to. In my book, I am very careful not to jump to conclusions I can't confirm.
Right.
With Fuddy, I can't confirm it. It looks awfully suspicious. I just can't confirm it. I don't have enough information to go beyond that.
Mm-hmm. And Spanman was also concerned that, publishing your books through these major publishing houses, perhaps they might influence what you write. I mean, it comes back to what we were saying about, being paid by the news or whatever. How do you get around that sort of thing?
Well, in my experience, I really haven't had any trouble. Here's where the trouble is. The trouble is finding a major publisher, like a big. Now there are fewer and fewer publishers. They're all owned by German conglomerates or whatever. They're all looking over their shoulders. They're all indebted to Obama. It is the publisher who did like my TWA 800 book was Regnery, which is a reliable, old school, conservative publisher. The publisher doing my Unmasking Obama book is Post Hill, which is a newer, but generally I would call it a conservative imprint. They do a great job, but they're not. I've had other books published by HarperCollins and Simon & Schuster, et cetera. But those books are somewhat less controversial, I would say that. And it's getting harder and harder to land a contract with one of those kind of publishers.
Right. And what do you think about these book deals that Obama is getting, Michelle Obama? They're getting paid, millions. I mean, you've written a ton of books. about topics that people are very interested in. You're very well known. Obviously, you weren't the president of the United States, not as well known as them, but it seems possible that some of these book deals, some of these Netflix deals are a way to funnel money to these people as a payoff for something.
Yeah, well, in the case of I don't understand this at all. Michelle Obama's book Becoming, right?
Becoming
has
what?
allegedly sold 10 million copies. It's still on the New York Times bestseller list after a year or so. I have never seen one single copy of that book in the wild. Have you ever seen anyone holding that book?
No.
I've never seen it.
Not on a plane or anything?
Three-quarters of all books are still bought as books, not as ebooks. I've never seen a copy of it outside of a bookstore. I can't believe that 10 million people bought that book. I've never heard a conversation about the book.
Right.
I don't know what's going on there, but I don't believe it. I'm very skeptical of that. By the way, Michelle Obama can't write a lick. I mean, she couldn't. Her thesis was described, her thesis from Princeton, Christopher Hitchens described as written in no known language, So, and he was being generous.
Right.
I mean, obviously someone else wrote it. I mean, a lot of people have ghostwriters. I do my fair share of that myself. It's not. I don't mean to mock her there. I just can't believe there's anything interesting in that book or anyone buy the book. Obama's book, by the way. Now, this is what's more interesting. His memoir, which should have been out a long time ago, which was due out a year ago, still isn't out yet. And I've got to believe they're being a little cautious based on what comes out of the of Obama's final act of mischief in the White House, and that is the whole Russia collusion story, which has his fingerprints all over. And I closed my book, Unmasking Obama, with a detailed account of how Obama's hand is all over that. And I tell this story through the death of Seth Rich, which is, to me, the really interesting story. I find that story much more interesting than Epstein's death.
Well, people can pre-order the book right now. It's coming out August 18th, 2020. So just before the election, bit of an August surprise, but people can pre-order it now on Amazon. Jack, I saw an interview that you did, and I think you and I have spoken about this. I can't remember if it was on the phone or on a show, but you had found evidence that caused you to believe that Bill Ayers had written, Dreams of My Father or something like that?
Dreams of My Father, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a story there, because it was interesting. I was just reading an account in Atlantic or the New Yorker by someone who was claiming that I have no idea how that story started about Bill Ayers writing Obama's book. Well, I have an idea because I started it. And if you don't even know who started it or how it started, why are you talking about it in pages of the New Yorker? No, what happened was I didn't pick up Dreams from My Father, Obama's 1995 memoir, until the summer of 2008. And I was just in a bookstore in an airport. I was bored. I said, well, I guess I got to read this. I started reading it, and I quickly came to the conclusion he didn't write it, which isn't unusual for a politician, except that in 1995, he wasn't even a politician. Who hires a ghostwriter, when they're struggling law student or whatever, So I started just looking around for word matches and just doing a little literary forensics and wasn't making any headway. I dropped that. And then I started looking into, in September of 2008, I just started thinking, I wonder if Bill Ayers met Barack Obama before they got to Chicago in the early 90s. I wonder if they knew each other in New York, because they were both at and around Columbia in the 80s. And so I bought a copy of Bill Ayers' book, Fugitive Days, his memoir, which came out on September 11, 2001. Bad timing, Bill.
Yeah.
And especially if you're a bomber and you're not apologetic. But, looking at that, I'm about a third of the way into the book, and I said, bingo.
You could just tell by the writing style. It's the same guy.
I thought my first thought was they had the same ghostwriter. Well, they're both in Chicago. They're both radicals, They both hired the same ghostwriter. But then as I read more and more about Ayers and looked into his books and his background and what he did and how he did it, he is a very gifted writer and editor. And then it dawned on me, then I started doing word searches, matches. I started writing about it in WND. I started hearing from people all over the world who had similar suspicions and
Hmm.
began to send me their word comparisons and stuff. By October, I remember this very well because I needed space. I needed at least 3,500 words to make my case. And I could not get it from the Weekly Standard. They wouldn't even talk to me, even though I'd written for them before. National Review, even the American Spectator, they were so afraid of this topic. I said, I'm just going to present it as my thesis. People can shoot it down if they like, but here it is. The evidence is overwhelming that Bill Ayers played a major role in the writing of Dreams from My Father. American Thinker finally allowed me to do it on their page, on their website, on their journal online. My first article ever for them. Been writing for them ever since. And the response was huge. Rush Limbaugh started talking about it, et cetera. And all I'm asking are people like the National Review or Washington Times or Fox or the respectable conservative journals is look at my evidence. I know the major media don't want to see it, but my evidence is overwhelming by this time. I found, for instance, Bill Ayers, for instance, had been a merchant seaman right at a high school, and or I think he did a year in college and then joined the Merchant Marines. It was a traumatic experience for him. He was on the Atlantic for a year or two. I found 53 matching nautical metaphors between his book and Barack Obama's. I'm sorry.
Wow. That is compelling evidence.
That's just like one level out of 20 levels of points of comparison. And so I'm saying to these people, just look at the evidence. They know. In fact, David Remnick is an Obama fanboy, editor of the New Yorker, biographer. He wrote later, he goes, if enough people believe this to be true, if it were true, if enough people believed it true, it would have been the end of Obama's candidacy. And he was right. I had a month before the election for someone on our side to take it the next step, right? Everyone refused to move it further. No one would pick it up at all, not even to ask the question. And that's when I realized if I needed to be instructed, was that the failure of nerve on the part of the respectable conservative media has been a real drag on our whole movement and will continue to be as long as they remain nerveless.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. And, Starr is watching us on Periscope saying that Bill Ayers groomed Obama. The thing that I had first taken notice of was this article in the New York Times, also on September 11th, 2001, basically announcing the memoir. And the headline of the article is, no regrets for a love of explosives. In a memoir of sorts, a war protester talks of his life with the Weathermen. It opens with a quote from Bill Ayers saying that he doesn't regret setting off bombs. I feel we didn't do enough. I mean, to me, Jack, this is at very least suggestive of foreknowledge. These guys love teasing little hidden messages, don't they?
Well, that may be, but I mean, let's just say it was coincidental. You're Bill Ayers. You get up on the morning of September 11th, and for 2 hours, you're on top of the world. Everyone's calling you, all your old friends. Oh, man, you really arrived. Look at the placement you got. And then 2 hours later, you're a total pariah. No, I think that is one of those things that fall into the category of coincidence. Yeah.
We're gonna disagree on that point because I have a feeling that the Weather Underground and other Marxist, communist, Alinskyite elements have been conspiring for decades, and that September 11th was their first bite at the apple. I think this COVID-19 thing is a second bite at the apple. I've identified now some individuals who went to the University of Chicago at the time that Michelle Obama was, what was she, the Associate Dean of Students from 1996 to 2009, something like that.
She had, towards the end, she was involved with this hospital. She was working a half-time job, making about $350,000 a year in some sort of communication something or another. Her career, her legal career was a series of downward steps. She graduated from Harvard with a law school, with a law degree, and people think that means anything. It didn't in her case. It meant that she got it under some quote or another. And so she starts out at a real law firm. She washes out of there. She washes out of another like the mayor's office or someplace. Then she ends up with the sinecure after Obama's elected the state Senate or U.S. Senate rather in 2004. So yeah, it's a series of downward steps. I don't know. What is perverse, Jason. I don't know how anyone out there in the world of the left, and I talk about this in Unmasking Obama, is how the left and all of the intersectional elements of it, like gay rights, female rights, etc., can find themselves in bed with the Islamic movement and be somehow comfortable. I mean, this is nuts,
Right.
And it makes you think, and it makes me think that there's logic to what you're telling us here.
Well, because isn't it true, Jack, in lots of situations, there are people who maybe aren't friends, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. So if radical jihadis want to overthrow the U.S. government and the Weather Underground, weathermen, socialists, and Marxists want to overthrow the U.S. government, they're going to work together to do that. Then when the U.S. government is gone, they'll turn on each other and kill each other, which we may be coming to pretty soon. But it's interesting because, it comes back to Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn, because as I've been told, Bernardine Dohrn was a mentor to Michelle Obama at Sidley Austin, the law firm in Chicago. Is that correct as far as you know?
Yeah, that is true. And what's also true, and David Garrow, who's an interesting guy, and I have some issues with him, but he was he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, civil rights historian. In 2017, he came out with a book called Rising Star, which is the most honest biography written about Obama's early years. And he admits, he says, right up until the time Obama ran for Senate, he and Michelle had almost dinner nightly with Bill and Bernardine and Rashid Khalidi and his wife, Mona,
Huh.
And that didn't get much attention, but it is there. And it's, and Garrow is, as a leftist, as an avowed leftist, he's, arguing against his own interest to put these people together. And on a regular basis, right up until the time Obama ran for Senate, he was not just some guy in a neighborhood. He was a part and parcel of the Obama life in Chicago.
Right.
Because at that time, they were superstars on the left. Bernardine Dohrn and Ayers less so. You're a little too young to remember, Jason, but Bernardine was the hottest radical in our time, when she was back in the late 60s, early 70s, when she was at her peak.
Because she was an attractive young woman, and she was out there protesting the war.
And she was like the leader of the Weather Underground, which were very visible. For an underground organization, you couldn't turn on TV without seeing them, Ayers was like some other guy. I mean, I barely even knew Bill Ayers. But Bernardine Dohrn was, she had a folk singer hair and a stripper bod. She was up there. So she was, the first pinup on the left.
Wow. I've become pretty fascinated with this Weather Underground because, as you said, I was too young to really know about it. And I never knew about it until like about a year ago. And Sidley Austin, David Hawkins and I, who have a regular show on Fridays, they'll be coming up tomorrow. We talk a lot about Sidley Austin. I went and visited the Sidley Austin offices in New York City just a few days ago, and I noticed that they had this sculpture out in front of it that is a very distinctive triangle. The thing that interested me about it is that I knew it had some meaning, or at least I should say I feel it has some meaning. There's this sort of set of three buildings that appear identical. The first one is 1121 6th Avenue. That's the home of Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, a fake news agency that I feel is repeatedly publishing nonsense stories, whether they're in the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, or the New York Post. And I keep seeing all these connections all over the place. The New York Post has published a real lot of stories about things that seem remarkably unimportant but have to do with In-N-Out Burger. And they basically had 3 stories about an In-N-Out burger being found on the street in Queens, which is extremely unlikely since the closest In-N-Out burger is in Texas. But they also featured this bizarre story about Ghislaine Maxwell actually eating at an In-N-Out burger, which became super interesting to me because this In-N-Out burger is literally a 2-minute walk from my previous home in Los Angeles. So I called In-N-Out Burger's corporate offices because it was very obvious to a lot of people on the internet, Jack, that this photo of Ghislaine Maxwell has been retouched. She looks like she's about 30. Her face is wrinkle-free. And this was taken in 2019, where I think she was about 57. She looks a little bit more her age in this photo. And there were so many unanswered questions when I posed these questions to the journalists at the New York Post who contributed to this story. They didn't have really very good answers. What is your feeling about the concept of newspapers being utilized by intelligence agencies to transmit secretive messages?
Well, let's start. Let me back up a little bit. And is that Alawid bin Talal, about whom we were speaking earlier, as you know, is or certainly has been a major owner of News Corp. He had a big share of News Corp. I don't know if he still does, but he did for a long time. I think the CIA has been using American journals from the beginning of its foundation. Occasionally they get caught doing it. Everyone's embarrassed for a little bit, but no, that's been going on forever. I mean, it precedes the CIA. I'm currently reading a book called A Woman of No Importance, which is a very good book about an American female spy during World War II, and she was fronting for the New York Post then. Right.
Wow.
That was her cover. In 1940 was as a reporter for the New York Post.
Wow.
So it's an old tradition. It would not shock me at all.
And people are now in the comments here, they're talking about a documentary that came out about a week or 2 ago on YouTube called Pedogate 2020. I found it fascinating. I happened to catch it in the first few days that it was out. And it reveals some stunning new evidence about Epstein and international pedophilia rings. It showed evidence of hidden links. And again, this is not to say that anyone who is employed by In-N-Out Burger is involved, but there was an Instagram account that was linked to really lascivious photos of women and even some photos and videos of young children that were all tagged with this very specific In-N-Out Burger tag. And it was bizarre that In-N-Out Burger's general counsel was insistent on getting me to take my video down, where I played a phone call asking their media representative if they were going to contact the FBI and share any information about Ghislaine Maxwell. They were definitely more interested in threatening, suing, and trying to get me jammed up in a criminal charge for recording a phone call in New York where it's legal. They were much more interested in that than pursuing Ghislaine Maxwell. Strange.
Yeah, no, I don't know much about In-N-Out Burger, though the very title of the In-N-Out always struck me as a little odd, but that's just me. But
and you've done a lot of writing about plane crashes as well. This may fall into the category of, the type of thing where you're walking along a creek and you suddenly find yourself in it. But it's worth mentioning that 2 In-N-Out Burger executives in the fateful year of 1993 died in a plane crash, one of them being the son of the founder. And he was this was Richard Snyder. He was the president at the time and the son of the founder of the organization. Him and the executive vice president died after breaking a long-standing rule about not flying together in a chartered jet. Coincidence, I'm sure.
You never know. I mean, it would not, again, shock me if it were not. By the way, speaking of plane crashes, I'm going to ask you a favor, Jason.
Sure.
If you could pull up my novel, The Hunt, from my Amazon page.
Sure.
Which is it's fiction. It just came out just before this whole silly thing struck. And but if you're looking for a diversion during this period, this is because it involves a terrorist plot on the president of the United States, his private the jet that he's flying into Aspen, Colorado. So it's a very heroic, feel-good story. I wrote it in a sense so that late adolescents on up, men could have something to read other than the crap they give them in high school. So buy it for your adolescents or your college students or your husbands who are sitting around, or yourselves wondering when they're going to get back to work.
Yeah. You know, I'm somewhat of an aviation fan myself. I've flown on a lot of different varieties of aircraft. I'm not a pilot, of course, but my former career as a cinematographer and a director had me traveling all around the world, and I just am really interested in different jet aircraft. One of the things that came up, with the whole Jeffrey Epstein investigation that fascinated me was this, there's been a lot of attention put on the jet, the interior of the jet, and what was going on there. The thing that a lot of people don't know, Crowdsource the Truth viewers know this, but the thing that many people don't know is that Epstein, his primary jet, this Lolita Express, was a Boeing 727 that was manufactured in 1969. And it always struck me as really odd that somebody with a $500 million fortune would fly a 50-year-old jet, and particularly the 727. It's the least common Boeing jet ever made, so finding parts for it, finding mechanics for it, it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense unless there's something very specific about the jet that causes you to keep it in service. One of the things that's unique about the Boeing 727 is that it's got this rear door that can be opened in flight, and it's interesting. Perhaps you remember the incident where D.B. Cooper hijacked a Boeing 727 and jumped out the back of it. So,
specifically
one of the
for that purpose, by the way, because he needed a rear door to jump out of.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. And the point is, this is a very unique jet aircraft, because no jet before or since that I'm aware of, certainly no commercial jet, and this thing you can buy them for $1 million. This door could be used to drop payloads of drugs. You could drop a bomb out the back of it. You could put a JDAM guided system on a bomb and launch 4 or 5 of them and take out a government over Africa or Haiti or wherever.
Or you could drop that 12-year-old off before you get caught landing with her.
Well, exactly.
Not that that's but it's if you're on the Lolita Express, you're probably thinking things like that.
Absolutely.
Actually, in defense of Boeing, their planes from that era are workhorses. They are remarkably reliable. That's why when TW-800 went down, it was a 747, they tried to say, well, it's 25 years old, stuff happens. No, it had flown a gazillion miles before. No 747 had ever gone down. No 747's gone down since. It was just something they said to fill the space and to divert attention from the truth of it.
Well, I absolutely agree with you, and there are a lot of questions about the TWA Flight 800 crash. The reason why I still doubt that super billionaires would fly this thing is because this is a jet that was designed in a time gone by. It's a tri-jet, and these were designed because at the time the FAA would not allow 2-engine aircraft to fly over international waters, and the 747 was and remains very expensive to operate. So these tri-jets were designed, and the third engine that's actually mounted partially inside the fuselage, it's much more complicated and expensive to service. So I mean, again, obviously the planes can be maintained to last for 50 years, for 60 years, whatever. It just doesn't seem to make sense, particularly given fewer 727s were manufactured. When you compare it to, let's say, a 737, that's the most common commercial jet aircraft ever made. So if you had billions of dollars, why not get one of those? The thing that really piqued my interest about this, because, smart guys like you and Charles Ortel just presumed that I was barking up the wrong tree. But we learned yesterday that fellow pervert, weirdo, rapist Peter Nygaard also flew. I should say he's an accused rapist. He also flew a 727. And it starts to become really curious, Jack, because, I'm sure you're aware of Aleister Crowley's Thelema religion and some of the bizarre sexual rituals that are involved in that.
Yeah.
Is it a stretch of the imagination to presume that these billionaires are having private islands and specific jet aircraft that allow them to carry out perhaps blood sacrifices and human rituals and then chuck the dead person out the back into the ocean?
Well, if you get back into Aleister Crowley's history, and it was remarkable how influential he was, and the people who went through there, who were his allies, um, and including some very prominent journalists as well. Among them, Walter Duranty, the guy, the New York Times reporter who suppressed the story of the Soviet Holocaust, the murder of like 6 million Ukrainians. Crowley was. That's the story that people need to look up if they've never talked about it before. It's real, and it's scary, and it was dark. And if it lingered into the present day, I would not be surprised. And it's interesting you mentioned jets, because one of the guys in America who's most influential, and this guy's story needs to be read if you haven't read it, is his name was Jack Parsons. And he worked at the jet fuel lab in Pasadena.
Absolutely. And
he was
involved
a
with
literal
Scientology.
Scientist, right? He was mixed up with what's his name? Who was the founder of Scientology?
L. Ron Hubbard. Yeah.
Ronald Hubbard.
Wife swapping. So, very close friends.
Heinlein, the scientific writer, was part of their menage a trois, etc. And back in Pasadena, the story is dark and bizarre beyond belief. Parsons is an incredible character. And he was a literal, he was working in the jet lab, and he was a literal rocket scientist. So who knows what goes on there,
And a Tholemite. He was super into Aleister Crowley, Thelema.
Yeah.
I think he was also, I used to do a lot of stories about Jack Parsons and all this stuff with a guy named Quinn Michaels, who I no longer speak to. But, it got into CERN, and it got into Enrico Fermi, and how these guys wanted to use particle colliders to create a man-made singularity, because it was their belief, not mine, their belief that it could be used to open a portal to another dimension and communicate with extraterrestrials.
Yeah, Parsons, I would recommend your readers or viewers, if there is, to go online and look for the Parsons biography. It will be the most entertaining book you'll read during the season of COVID,
Right.
Other than, of course, The Hunt by Jack Cashill and Michael McMullen, our novel. But no, this is a true story. It's well told, and it's amazing,
Yeah. You've actually got quite an impressive library of books that you've written, Jack. So for people who are perhaps seeing you for the first time right now, they can get onto Amazon and fill up their Kindle with lots of different mostly nonfiction, but you've written quite a few books there.
I wrote 2 novels and about, 10 or 11 nonfictions, yeah.
Very prolific. So what I'm detecting is that it doesn't seem like that far of a stretch in your imagination that these guys could be doing Crowley-esque rituals on jets and private islands. There's all that weird symbology on Jeffrey Epstein's island. He's got that temple. Right.
If you're willing to live your life the way Epstein did, and live the kind of risk, take the kind of risks he took, nothing that he did or might have done is beyond my imagination,
So in our last few minutes here,
like
Jack.
Temple, doesn't it?
What's that?
It looks like a temple or a mosque or something,
Well, it had a dome on it. It had a gold dome on it that did resemble a temple for sure. And there's, when you look at aerial views of this island, there's all kinds of sundials and interesting symbols and things that would seem to have some sort of significance. I don't think people put stuff like this around on a whim. Somebody designed it and thought about it.
Right.
And
someone had to think it through. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole lot going on there. So in just our last few minutes here, Jack, what can you share with people about the forthcoming book, without revealing too much, just to kind of entice people as far as what they might see when Unmasking Obama comes out in August?
Well, let me just tell you one thing that's really fascinating, and it's I will have to credit David Garrow with being honest about this information, where he got it from. David Garrow is Pulitzer Prize winning Obama biographer. Because the information doesn't appear in the hardcover edition of his book, but it did appear in the paperback. And I contacted Garrow and said, "Okay, tell me why it's in the paperback and not in the hardcover." And he explained, and it was a good explanation, was that the letter in question the woman who gave him the letter, a former Obama friend, female friend back in his days when he was just in college or out of college, would not allow him to release it unredacted. So when his book came out, it was not in the book. However, in the paperback, by that time, she had sold her letters to Emory University. He went to Emory University, got a hold of the letters, and it's a fascinating letter in which Barack Obama, as a 23-year-old, admits to being a bisexual.
Whoa.
And it's a bombshell letter, and it's buried in his book, and he didn't want to talk about it. But in my book, it's not buried. So that's one part of the story. I would say one of the part, I mean, there's lots of stories that are, like I say, I highlight those people who broke all of these different stories, and there must be 20 different stories. The story that interests me most, and is the story I close with, and I'm still working on, is what happened to Seth Rich. And we know he was murdered, and we know and we know that the media, and it was like with Mary Pinchot Meyer, there was a concerted effort on the part of the media and the government to make sure no one investigated his murder. His death remains unsolved. Mm-hmm. I get 2 minutes to explain this, but a woman who's very interesting at the heart of this story now is the woman who is started, I believe it's called Talking Point News or Talking Media News. Are you familiar with this? Her name's Ellen Ratner.
Oh,
She's
yes.
a liberal journalist, right? Do you know her, Jason?
Michael Ratner's sister.
Michael Ratner's sister. Michael Ratner had been the attorney for Julian Assange before he died last year of natural causes, 2018, the natural causes. And that's legit. That's not an issue. She goes to visit us. She's in London. She stops to visit Assange. And this is in December of 2018, right? Mm-hmm. And she appears on this innocuous, video university talk show. And she just casually mentions that she just visited Assange. And Assange fingers Seth Rich and Aaron Rich, Seth's brother, as the people who gave him the information about WikiLeaks, from the original document dump from the DNC. Mm-hmm. And she just mentioned this casually. The other panelists don't even make note of it, right? So another fellow, and this is involved now, who's gets into it. He talks to her. He goes to talk to the Rich parents, talks to Aaron, and then things start going haywire. And the story's all there. All you have to do is follow up on it. Look up Ellen Ratner, Google Ellen Ratner and Seth Rich, and you'll find out.
Is this the video right here, Jack?
Yeah. Yes, that's right there. That's exactly right. On that video, she's going to talk about it. Wow. The fellow who went to follow up, and his name I may be screwing up, maybe Ed Orlovsky, I think. She tells him. He goes, talks to the Rich family.
No, it's Ed Butowski. Ed Butowski.
Butowski, right? I'm sorry, I was confusing with someone else. I knew it was some Owski or another, but it's fascinating. The information's all there. All it's waiting for someone to make that next step. But right now, anyone who tries to investigate is likely to get sued. Right. That's where we are in the state of American journalism today. And Fox was shamed out of even talking about it,
Right. I've got a lot of questions about this, Seth Rich. Now, you opened up by saying we know that he's been murdered. I question even that. Have you seen the autopsy, Jack?
No, I have not.
Have you seen the death certificate?
I saw the investigation report, the WPD investigation report. Mm-hmm. I talked to, and now I'm not even going to mention this.
Rod Wheeler?
I have another source I can't even talk about it, but it confirms everything that I suspected. The source is too good. I can't reveal it. I would be in real trouble.
I wouldn't ask you to reveal the source. I was onto this story fairly early on, and actually one of the very first interviews I ever booked. Interesting how people want to try to disrupt our broadcast when we start talking about that. But one of the first people I interviewed was Rod Wheeler, who is the former It's interesting. When you Google Jason Goodman, Rod Wheeler, it doesn't seem to come up right away. But he was the former Washington, D.C. Metro Police detective who was hired by Ed Butowski to conduct a private investigation on behalf of the rich family. Seems weird to me that Ed Butowski would do this, and it's never really been explained. Rod Wheeler has now been in the crosshairs of these lawsuits, and he recounted for us a number of different things that he said never happened. No police lookout, no autopsy, no body camera footage. It's quite a story.
Yeah, it is. Butowski's lawsuit for defamation against various entities is probably the best source of information now as to what is known. And my own source that I can't reveal at all, I can't even hint at, confirms that there are at least two killers. There were two shots. I believe there is excellent reason to believe they were Spanish speaking, and that their motive was to get information out of Rich and then killing him once, because you couldn't let him walk away,
Yeah. I don't know. I'd love to have a conversation with you about this offline, because there's so many people involved with this guy, Ed Butowski. I don't trust him at all. That's in a statement of opinion. Ed Butowski has been represented by the lawyer Stephen Biss, a name you might recognize because Stephen Biss is representing Devin Nunes in a number of lawsuits that have been heavily criticized in the legal community and in federal courts in Virginia. He's also representing Robert David Steele in a lawsuit against me. And it's interesting to note that Virginia has recently introduced some anti-SLAPP statutes that have yet to fully pass, but they actually cite the Devin Nunes cases and even this lawyer that we're talking about. So
the lawyer that I contacted in regard to Butowski,
Ty Clevenger.
Ty Clevenger, yeah, it's a different attorney altogether, right?
Yes.
So,
but all these guys are connected in some way. That's
I don't know
very
Butowski. I don't know Clevenger. I can't vouch for either of them. But the information seems legitimate, and until I know better, I'm going to keep looking.
Definitely not criticizing you or your information. Just saying that
there are limits to what I know.
Well, right. And it's, this is a tactic that I've observed that social engineers use. They want to take a piece of illegitimate information and force it into legitimacy, getting it in the mainstream news, making an allegation in a federal lawsuit. Because if you just say something on a YouTube video or a blog or even an article, that's one thing. But if you can say a federal lawsuit alleges XYZ, that makes it real in some kind of way. So this is a direction I didn't expect us to go in. But it's interesting nonetheless, and it's part of the whole crowdsourcing of the truth thing.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you having me on here tonight, Jason. I don't want to take too much of your time, but you do a great service. You are a part of the Samizdat. Look up that word now. And,
thank you.
SAMIZDAT. Absolutely. One of the willing Lilliputians in our coalition. And Gulliver is running scared. So keep at it.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to thank you, Jack. I can tell the sun is setting where you are. It's getting late, and I appreciate your time. So people who are watching us right now are going to want to make their way over to Amazon, where they can place a pre-order for Unmasking Obama, the fight to tell the true story of a failed presidency that continues to fail right before our very eyes. I really appreciate, Jack, you naming me a member of the Amistad, if I'm pronouncing that correct.
Samizdat. You're confusing it with the Amistad, where you wear a beard and you walk around.
Exactly.
You fix farm implements. It's a different thing altogether. No,
but everybody watching. Yeah. Everybody watching is part of that, because, I can't do these kind of great interviews with wonderful people like Jack Cashill without your support. So if you're watching right now, if you watch every day, if you enjoy the show, please become a sponsor. Go to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. In addition to enabling independent journalism like this, you're going to get access to a huge and growing library of sponsor exclusive content. So I hope people will go over there. there. Really want to thank you, Jack, for another great conversation. I gotta meet you sometime and go to dinner and really sit down and talk about some of this stuff, because
well, New York is my, I grew up in that area. So one of these days I get back there. Once you guys stop, destroying America, we'll come back.
I look forward to that for sure.
Okay.
Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for
you too,
watching,
Jason.
and
Thanks
thank
for
you,
having me.
Jack.
Okay.
Wonderful
Bye-bye.
to have you. Take care.